I did sleep in hammocks for nights until a bed opened, but I just knew I needed to be there. And a couple nights days that I was there, I went out on that little lawn and I just started practicing yoga for myself. And people were like kind of looking at me and whatever, I guess I didn't really notice, but a friend that I'm still friends with today said, yeah, her and her friend kept looking at me and like, what's he doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then I would say like 4 or 5 days later, I was teaching 20 people on that lawn. And people just kept coming up and being like, hey, can you teach me? And I was just teaching a class. And that was the moment, or there wasn't one particular moment, but through that experience, I knew that this is what I was supposed to do.
Welcome to the Shift Your Vibe to Thrive podcast. My name is Emily Evans Russell, and I'm a single mom, multiple six-figure business owner, and master mindset and energy coach. I created this podcast with two main targets. One, to give you practical tools so that no matter where you are in your life right now, you not only know that things can shift, but you know how to make them greater. And two, to change your frequency so that you become an energetic match for everything you desire. I'm talking your relationships, your finances, your success, all of it. Think of this podcast as your weekly energetic upgrade with a mix of subconscious mind hacks, ways to quantum leap, and consciousness shifts. A place where you learn to sculpt your reality and actually finally truly have the magical life you deserve and one that works for uniquely you. Are you ready to uplevel your reality? I think I hear yes, so sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Thank you so much for being here. And now let's go to the show. When I created this podcast, one of my main targets was to just have conversations with really amazing people. And some of the people I have on, I know, some I don't know at all. But basically, I want the world to get to know all these different perspectives, the way people live, the way they see the world, the universe, energy, whatever they call that, whether it's source or God or how they relate to this thing that's bigger than us. And you, James, have been in my life it's been over 25 years, right?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I know. It's hard. I know when we figured that out, when we were together in Mexico, I was like, wow, okay. Yeah. That puts things in perspective. No wonder
And you're like, I wonder what we're going to be doing in another 25. I was like, that's a great question. Where will we be hanging out?
Yeah, it's so limitless as to like where we could be in the world and what we'd be doing and where we'd be in our lives. Because I never thought in a million years, if you told me 25 years ago I was going to have a yoga studio and be in Mexico with you, I would have been like, okay, like I don't think so.
I don't think so. Because James and I met, it was my first job out of college. I was hosting, waitressing, bartending at the restaurant where you had worked for a little while. So we met and immediately like just saw something in each other. And over the years, that relationship has changed and shifted. And sometimes we're talking all the time, living in the same city. Sometimes we're not talking at all. But I will say one thing that I noticed from you in the beginning, and now I have just a vast appreciation of, is that you really see a person's being, like their essence, who they are. And so no matter whether you were bartending or teaching yoga or leading retreats, it's this energy you are where you see people and appreciate them on a level that I think a lot of people aren't aware of or even think to function like that.
Yeah, you've mentioned that, and other people will use different language around that to kind of reflect that characteristic in me, and sometimes it comes off as, one of my friends made a point that I always keep people's dignity when I talk about them, like even if there's things about them that might be in other people's eyes like a little off, or like it disturbs them or irks them. And I don't know where I cultivated that from. I attribute it to my mother. I don't know. There was just something about her essence and her being and how she lived her life not in this grand way, but in these really intimate ways. Like I watched her with her children, and I watched her with my dad and her friends. And she always had this ability to see, I don't even want to say the potential in people. It was really just who they innately were through all the bullshit, through all their whatever their job was or whatever their position in life was. She, I don't know. It's like she didn't behave differently, and she was able to be with that person and have conversations or talk with that person or bring out that those characteristics in that person, right? I mean, sometimes it's like about seeing something that sometimes people don't even see in themselves, that is their innate beauty and their gifts. So that's the only thing I can attribute it to, is just really being close with my mom and observing her in that way in her intimate relationships.
Well, when you say that about her, which I see in you as well, I think so many people, when we relate to each other just on a mental level, like we kind of think we're a certain person or image, and they kind of do. And then there's like the surface interaction. But when you describe your mom, like when you're really embodied and present with someone, not that your mom would use that language, but like you
Right.
said, just with them, there's that layer gets to go away, and you just get to be with that person as they truly are, without all of the kind of posturing or what we just tend to do when the way the world works.
Hmm.
Can you talk about a little bit about then, since you were mentioning, I don't know where I got this from, but how you got from the family you grew up in, you know, ended up where you live now, and now you run this amazing yoga studio in Chicago, Tejas Yoga. Can you talk a little bit about how you created that path, if you knew what the F you were doing on the way?
Yeah. Well, it was not a linear path. That is for sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess to give a little bit of background, I grew up in an alcoholic household. I was the youngest of six kids. My mother really dealt with a lot of depression in her life to different degrees. I'm 50 years old, so I grew up in a generation where it's like you kind of were left to your own devices. Like you really weren't coddled very much. And I ended up moving through life even at a very young age of just learning how to take care of myself and not being very, I guess, directed. My family was working class. We didn't college, academia, hitting the books just wasn't, if you weren't failing, like you were like, yay, good for you. Like just get fucking through school. Just do it. Like a job is waiting for you at the end of all this.
Yay.
Yeah, so that's kind of how we grew up. And I don't mean to disparage my parents in any way. They're great people. But I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. I never thought I would own a business. My father started sweeping floors in a printing company and then eventually became, after decades, vice president of that printing company. So, he just, that's all I knew was printing. And once he got into a place of management, actually discouraged me to ever own my own business. He's like, always work for somebody else, Jimmy. Always just, it's a pain in the ass. Like you're to be in charge of everything. Like you'd get called in the middle of the night because the alarm would go off at the shop and you'd have to go down there. And like owning a business, like being an entrepreneur, it's a 24-hour thing, but this doesn't shut off unless you really like carve out the time to shut it off. And even then, it's iffy. And then not even to be an entrepreneur, but to then get into healing arts was, again, never something I thought I would ever see myself in, because I was a troublemaker. Even though I was a very sensitive kid, I didn't have the context to place those innate abilities that I had and the gifts that I have into that context, because I didn't grow up. I didn't know what the fuck yoga was. I didn't know what anything in that realm was at all, or really fitness. I mean, sports, right? I wasn't even that good at sports. I didn't play sports. So anything to do with health and mental wellness and all of those things just were not a part of me growing up. So I didn't get exposed to any of that until I moved to Chicago. And when I moved to Chicago, that was when I really started doing my own work of healing and repairing childhood trauma. And I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I just knew I was feeling all of these things and being overwhelmed. And so I felt like I was a pretty good writer. So I wrote a lot, is one of my avenues. I wrote letters to my dad, who they confused him a lot. He's like, why is he writing me these letters, these confessionals? And so it was just one of those things where I was figuring out a lot of ways on my own to process and heal our experiences. I didn't therapy, psychotherapy, talk therapy, any of that. That wasn't in my wheelhouse. So writing and journaling and then writing letters, whether I sent them or not, I wrote letters I didn't even send to my mother, to my father, or to people that I just felt like I had an experience with that created something, some sort of trauma. And so it wasn't until I met my spiritual mentor, who her name is Jerry Lee Lucas. I met her through one of the first people that I was dating here, his birth mom, who he had just like reconvened with. He had not known her, met her his whole childhood, and just met her as an adult. And so their relationship was really new. And we were going to go visit her. And she was a yoga teacher, and she calls herself like an esoteric yoga healer. And so she does a lot of energy work along with teaching yoga. And that was my first yoga class.
Wow.
And I mean, she literally changed my life. I can't express how much that is true. It was like she had the key to unlock a door that I didn't even know was locked. And I felt so different after one yoga class with her. And this is how powerful she really is, and yet so humble, that I just asked tons of questions. And she gave me one or two of her own books. She told me what other books to get. Back then, I wasn't making a lot of money. I was, what, 23, I guess,
Right.
22, maybe, and just moved to the city and living in a studio apartment. And there wasn't a yoga studio on every corner. So I didn't know where to go to continue learning what I felt like she really had to offer, because she was in Indiana. So once I moved back to the city, I got a couple of books that she told me. Like I said, she was into esoteric healing. She did polarity work. She worked a lot with Barbara Brennan, and who is an esoteric healer, and lots of other teachers. She studied with Indra Devi for yoga. So I started teaching myself one yoga posture a day from a book. That's how I started
Wow.
practicing yoga. I would read about it, I would look at the shape, and then I would just every day just add like one more yoga pose, or I would do multiple ones. Like, I didn't like sequencing and all that shit. Like, I was literally just doing whatever was in the book. And so that's kind of how it started. I knew that there was something there that shifted my perspective. It was really like a paradigm shift for me. I started viewing the world in a different way after my class with her. So there was a trigger there. That jump started a lot of self work from
Yeah.
there.
I love that metaphor you used. It's like she had a key to a door you didn't even know was there. And I think I look in my life and all of the people that I've known and my family, and it's like everyone has these different keys. Some you get by being born into the family you're in, and we get a lot of other stuff too. But it's amazing because really, and maybe that friendship cycle or relationship cycle might end, but
Mhm.
you get these amazing keys to things and they like paradigm shifts, like you said, that really interacting with other people can bring to us. And you mentioned about Jerry Lee, which I will say, having been in many of your yoga classes, I had the honor of doing your teacher training. right after the birth of my second daughter. I remember I used to come into Chicago for the day and like have my breast pumped because I was still breastfeeding her,
That's
doing yoga
right.
training. Um, but you always like there's so much more in your classes going on than the beautiful poses and the brilliant sequencing. There's an energy healing by being in your presence, and like you mentioned with her, that really is something that is difficult to put words to, but creates such massive change. So after you're there learning from your book and the different poses in your early 20s, where did you go after that? Like,
Well, you know, I had quite an interesting decade there. I was just coming out sexually and figuring out what I was attracted to, like accepting a lot of who I was in totality, not just with sexuality, but also just who I wanted to be in the world. I had an amazing group of friends that I was meeting. You were one of them. That through the restaurant that we worked at, it was like a vortex. We cultivated relationships that we will have for the rest of our lives,
yeah,
and just so grateful for that. So there was a lot of exploration of who I wanted to be in the world. And I suppose this happens for everybody that are in their 20s. Not everybody in their 20s. I feel actually quite grateful for the way that my 20s went down, even though I might not have made all the best decisions in the world. But that's a part of it too, is just learning from your mistakes. So I had this dichotomy of almost like this internal civil war of everything that I grew up with. From it was reflective of I think people that grew up in an alcoholic household can relate, where it's like you really grow up typically not feeling great about yourself. There's a lot of self-criticism, I would say even self-hatred, as I did start to unravel some of what was going on for me mentally and emotionally. You didn't realize the impact of somebody criticizing you or constantly, or being an adult or feeling like you're making emotionally adult decisions at the age of 7 or 8, or being a part of conversations that you might not have supposed weren't probably great for you. So there was a lot of that to unravel. And one of the ways that I dealt with that was drinking alcohol, doing drugs, and having sex. And those were three, that was like a triple whammy. That's like the trifecta of fucking
totally.
escapism right there. And alcoholism was something that I was familiar with, right? It was something that was accepted in my family. So to me, there wasn't any red flags. I wasn't abusing it according to like my history,
Right.
even though I was. I will say something about all the drugs that I was taking on and off. That was when ecstasy was quite popular. And so I did my share of that. And to be honest, that and shrooms, but I did more ecstasy, were really game changers for me, also for being able to tap into a truthfulness for me about who I am and my strength. Actually, like there was a lot of acceptance and changing the narrative for me through those drugs, honestly, and surrounding myself with people that really love me and accept me for who I am.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I mean, we had some many nights at clubs in Chicago, and I look back at that too. I remember, like you said, ecstasy was so popular, and I remember thinking, well, this is what I imagine the world being like, could be like all the time, where people are just like really enjoying things and their bodies and each other and music and nature. And I'm like, Miss Bright Eyed, like, this would be great. And we don't want to rely on a drug for that, but like you said, it really also can, when you're with people that really support you. And at that time in my life, I didn't know another way to access that either,
Right.
like on my own. And so it did open a door, whether it was the healthiest way to open that, but it was a little
Yeah.
uncomfortable. You can't, like, I don't regret it at all.
No, and it goes back to a very tantric point of view. Everything can be used for spiritual growth. So you're not judging something. And granted, there are unsafe ways to experience things, and you do have to be careful. And there's obviously a lot of drug abuse where it can easily get away from you. And I unfortunately have seen people, and it's sad to watch somebody, in particular somebody that you love, get entrapped and that
Yeah.
and not be able to get out. And I think that that's one of the things that when I reflect on the people that were in my life, I really do think there was some checks and balances there. Even though we indulged a lot of times, we also kept each other's dreams alive. We also inspired each other to like follow our passions and not get wrapped up in it. We knew it was a world that was a catalyst, but it wasn't a world that we wanted to
No.
live in. So that was really important, I think, in our lives, that we had one another for that, and feel lucky for that. While I'm doing all these things, I'm also practicing yoga. And I have this role model of Jerry Lee Lucas, who I feel like is an angel walking on earth. And even though she wouldn't describe herself necessarily that way, she's very humble and she is who she is. But she also instilled in me, the more I got to know her personally, that life can take you in all kinds of directions. And it might not, from the outside, look like this very clear path. And I think sometimes people might look at aspects of her life and place judgment and things like that. And she really taught me that it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. It's really about how you're feeling about yourself. And so, like I said, it was not a linear path. It took me a long time of saying to myself, I could never be a role model. I could never be somebody that could help somebody spiritually, mentally, or emotionally, because I'm fucked up. I'm a mess. I'm such a mess. And I don't even know how I could even be of service to somebody like she was, or like maybe other people I was getting exposed to at that point, other teachers. Or so that was a big chunk of my 20s, was getting comfortable with a role that I didn't feel good enough for. And so all of that self-hatred and low self-esteem and, yeah, just lack of dignity needed to get reconciled. And so yoga, the practices, the more that I did it, even though I felt like I would go to them, and then I wouldn't practice for a while, but it'd still be in my life in some way. It was just like this ebb and flow of being more introverted, working on myself, and then studying with a teacher and doing a 30-day intensive, like I just felt like it was all in. Then I'd revert back. I'm like, this is too much. I'd get overwhelmed. All these like things would come up, and it's so confrontational. It's like, it's such a joke when people think that yoga is supposed to bring all this bliss and peacefulness into your life. I'm like, well, you sure about that? Because
Well, I like you mentioned earlier too, like yoga, being an entrepreneur, it's gonna bring your shit up. Like it's but in the best way of, like you said, you went from, I have no clue how I could be in a space where I had to help anyone heal. But had you not walked through that like imposter syndrome that people talk about to where you are now, it's like you've affected so many people. You would have anyway had you not been a yoga teacher. I mean, just who you are. So how did you, with the healing, just doing yoga, having things change, how did you get from that space to it's not all bliss and joy? Hey guys, I just wanted to pop in here in the middle of the podcast to let you know that if you are loving this, James and I are going to be facilitating a retreat in Costa Rica this year, November 14th to 19th, 2024, where he will be facilitating and teaching the yoga, breathwork, and meditation in the mornings. We will be having all sorts of activities included: horse riding, whitewater rafting, but mostly a lot of relaxation. My other good friend, Amy Shine, will be facilitating in the evenings at sunset in the rainforest, somatic sensory journeys, inner dance. It is going to be a beautiful 5 days to really restore your energy and have peace and relax with 3 of us and just 12 people. So it's a very intimate experience. I'll put the link in the show notes below, EmilyEvansRussell.com /retreat to learn more?
Well, I kind of battled with, so I kept getting asked to teach. I started teaching, I did a program to teach kids yoga. When I was in college for the few years I literally gave it the old college try. It was not for me, but I thought I had tons of nieces and nephews. I felt like I might want to work with kids when I was in college. And so I, thought that I might want to be a teacher. So my teacher, Jerry Lee Lucas, said, I know a woman, she does a program, Yoga Kids. And so I did that program and I was like, maybe this would be fun. Like this would be a good way for me to like dive into teaching a little bit. So I did that and I was teaching kids, but then anywhere that I would teach, like a community center or something like that, they would always ask me to teach adult classes. And at that point, at the very beginning, I had no formal training to teach. I only had my own practice. So I would teach a class and it would be, I think, probably really bad. I'm sure looking back at that class, but I'm whatever. That's me again being judgmental. I'm sure people still got something out of it and they connected with me or whatever. But technically, it was probably a pretty horrible class. And then I just started doing more trainings and I would do a teacher training and that gave me some foundational techniques to work with in terms of how to teach a class. And then from there,
Well, I know you mentioned, as you say, people kept asking me to teach. So you went from the space of, I can't imagine being able to actually help anyone.
oh, right. Yeah.
And I know you've mentioned to me that time in Australia.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
So I was still battling with the whole idea of me being a yoga teacher and teaching these full on classes. I took some time off to backpack, and this was my first trip abroad. It was my first backpacking trip. I was going to be gone for 3 months. And so it was just for me to explore, be on my own. And I had no idea what to expect. And I pretty much just hitchhiked and maybe took a bus or whatever. And I ended up in Queensland in this place called Mission Beach. I was traveling with, it was like really crazy. Like we ended up like all pitching in to buy a car. Like traveling to Australia is like insane. Like you just have experiences. I don't know. Maybe it's
Really?
not that same way now, but it's like, it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like,
I remember
hey,
getting picked up on the side of the road. I was hitchhiking by a woman in her bikini with a cockatoo in the front seat and two naked kids in the back and a Jack and Coke can. She's like, hop on in. I'll take you wherever. I was like, okay, I'll sit with your sandy kids in the back. Yeah, wild.
yeah. I mean, I was sitting outside of McDonald's because at that point, like I was so low on money that I there were days where I had to, just so I got something in my stomach, I would buy a 35-cent McDonald's ice cream cone, like a soft serve ice cream cone. That was all I would eat on
Oh,
one given day. And then I'd eat normal like on other days, but for save money, I would just eat like one ice cream McDonald's because it was the cheapest thing that you could buy. So I'm sitting out there and I'm eating my ice cream cone and there was a board, those boards were like, hey, like we're going here, blah, blah, blah. So there's a Russian guy, an English woman, and some guy from Germany that were basically going to meet this person from Amsterdam, this couple from Amsterdam that was going to sell their car with all this camping equipment in it. And we just started talking like you do. You just talk to random strangers
yeah.
when you're backpacking. And they were like, hey, you want to join us? So I like pitch in to buy like this, this car and this camping equipment to just be like, well, where are you headed? They were going in the same direction. I was like, oh, that sounds great. We ended up in the whole Queensland area and then we stopped by Mission Beach and they didn't want to stop there. They didn't want to stay there. They just wanted to like check it out. And I immediately fell in love with this place. Everything, every cell in my body was telling me that I needed to stay here, but there weren't any rooms or beds available. And it was called the Tree House. And it was this gorgeous place that was just like really rustic. It was all like kind of open and it really was like a tree house. And you're basically on this cliff that just overlooked the forest. So right there, up there you've got the rainforest. And I didn't know what I was going to do because they were leaving and they're like, either you go or you stay. Like, and because there was no beds, I was like, I didn't know where I was going to sleep. I'd have to sleep outside
Yeah.
in a hammock. So I walked out on the lawn that overlooked the forest, and I felt like every vertebra, like you, if you've ever gotten a chiropractic adjustment where there's like literally like cracks along your spine, I was just standing, and that happened to me where I felt an adjustment in my spine from the base of my spine all the way up to the base of my skull. And everything got clearer. Like I felt like I left my body for a second and then immediately fully inhabited my body. And that's when I knew I needed to stay there. And I did sleep in hammocks for nights until a bed opened, but I just knew I needed to be there. And one of the first few nights, couple nights that I was, days that I was there, I went out on that little lawn and I just started practicing yoga for myself. And people were like kind of looking at me and whatever, I guess I didn't really notice, but a friend that I'm still friends with today said, yeah, her and her friend kept looking at me and like, what's he do? Like, what's he doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then I would say like 4 or 5 days later, I was teaching 20 people on that lawn. And people just kept coming up and being like, hey, can you teach me? And I was just teaching a class. And that was the moment, those moments, or there wasn't one particular moment, but through that experience, I knew that this is what I was supposed to do. And at that time at home, I was still bartending, waiting tables, and really teaching a class here or there, teaching kids here and there, but I wasn't like, I was not ready to make it into like my life's work. And after that experience, that's when I knew. I was like, it was just very clear to me because of the response that I was getting from people and how I felt about it,
Yeah.
that it filled my heart. I was like, there's nothing else that I'm supposed to do. Like, this is something I need to pursue and I need to put like everything into it. And it was scary because I didn't know what that was going to look like when I got back home. Here, I wasn't wearing shoes for 3 weeks. Like I was free. Go
That,
back home was just another story.
yeah, it's so beautiful. And I think you bring up a lot of points. I know one of the reasons I've always loved traveling is that sense of you're not in your home base. So it seems like there's so much more freedom. And I was just heard someone speaking about, yeah, when you travel, it really activates your right brain because you don't have a past in that place and you're probably not really going to have a future. So you're so in the present moment. But like you said, I don't know if any of us are ever ready for mentally think we're ready to now I'm going to be a yoga teacher for my life. But when it gets presented to you and you just step in and notice that how, like you said, how you felt, how the people were responding, and it just is kind of like, okay, guess I'm going in this direction. And I know that I just want to highlight how you said that because I think so many people have experienced that or are waiting to experience it because they're kind of like, but how do I know which way to go? And it's like you can't really figure that out. It doesn't make what you don't feel ready. And then you just sort of show up and go, okay, I'll get ready as I go, really,
Yeah. And I think it goes to show us how, in order to, if especially if we feel like we're in a place of transition or not sure what's next for us, how important it is to stay open to opportunities and situations and have the courage to step into them. Even though I, had this situation where people just kept asking me to teach them when I was in Australia, I was still nervous. I still didn't feel like I knew what the fuck I was doing,
Right.
but it's like I almost had no choice. Like it felt that way, even though I did have a choice. I was just like, this is just happening. I didn't, you know, you, it's really easy for us to separate ourselves and say, I didn't create this, but I did create it. I might not on a conscious level at that point in my life, but I did create it. And I think that that's what we have to remember, that we're fucking magical, that we are creating these scenarios and these opportunities for us on this much deeper level, and to own it. that when opportunity arises, and it hopefully emboldens us to find, the courage and to just do it. And yeah, and maybe there will be failures. Maybe, when we step into it, we step into a pile of shit, and be like,
Definitely.
oh, okay, so
Yeah.
you clean off your shoe and, you kind of move on.
But that grace that you spoke of, like, those first classes I taught probably weren't the greatest. But like to give ourselves that grace of that's how it is when you start. We see people that we often are inspired by, and they're like a different space on their path. You don't see the first class that they're like, oh gosh, I don't know training, but I'll sit here with you. I mean, I remember after I taught English in Japan for a year, and all you needed was a college degree to do that. And I came home and I thought, well, I really like teaching. Like I like this part of it. So I guess I'll teach high school. So I went back and did like a super accelerated program in a year to get your master's and then teach. And I remember going, oh my God, I can't believe they're giving me like all of these kids. I don't know. You can't teach that in a class. Like, you just learn by trial by fire. You're like, okay. And I remember at the end of every day being like, oh my God. But that's how, just giving yourself grace when you start something, but all that time, like you said, staying open to the feedback you're getting and going, okay, but this really fulfilled me, or this lit me up, and this was really difficult. So I'll look at that area, is such a beautiful way to experience something new and start to get a mastery of that. It doesn't start off like that for most of us.
No. And even doing the yoga kids training with Marsha Winnick, I enjoyed it, but that was sometimes, I guess the point is sometimes how you start isn't really what the finished product's going to be, or what you're really going to go into. I look at it as like a friend circle. Like when you move to a new city, you're going to meet a lot of different people, but sometimes it's the people that you meet through those other people that end up being the best friends that you have, the real significant relationships. It's not the initial people that you meet. And I feel like that's the same way when you go through life with anything like a career, or when you're just having life experiences. Sometimes that first experience is just a gateway to really what's there behind it.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really important to remember too. We sometimes get into this mindset of like permanence, right? Like if I start this is it. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. It could be, but even
I
if
don't
it
think so.
is for a longer period of time, it's like there's the saying, maybe it's a Buddhist saying, I don't know, I always forget where I hear things from, but the only thing that's consistent is inconsistency, or the only thing that's permanent is impermanence. Like that's it.
No.
It's what we got. It's what we got in this realm, or in this little universe we live in. So just count on that. I've counted on that for so many things. But even the business that I have now, the yoga studio, it's its own entity now at this point. Like me and Jim and the other teachers were just gatekeepers. This is going to live on, and it's going to morph, and it might turn into something else. And it has. I mean, COVID was proof of that. We ended up having to really modify how we offer this service that we have for people. So it's constantly in flux. So I think when we're trying new things, or when we're in states of transition, is to really keep that in mind. I think it helps. It's weird that it grounds us. That concept really grounds us, because it's like, because it's about impermanence, but at the same time, when we know that, it grounds us and be like, oh, okay, like we'll see what happens with this, and we'll see what happens next, kind of thing.
Isn't that interesting? It's like those quotes are beautiful, because I always think of it in that sense too. The universe is constantly expanding. So everything's constantly moving. And we as humans, I would say, have such a tendency to want to hold on, though. Like that concept of everything, the only permanence is impermanence, is sometimes like, but no, but this thing or this person, I really like them. Can we just keep this one around a while longer? But it's really when you get the beauty of that, as things go out, something greater comes in as well. It's just always that expansion is happening. And when you get that ease of it, it's this beautiful thing you can rely on to support you, actually, rather than when we resist it or try to hang on. Can you talk a bit about then, as we wrap through your journey of then over time you got back to the city. This is your main thing. And I know you had some resistance to starting a brick and mortar business. Like you said, now you have online things because COVID changed a lot.
Hmm.
How did you manage that like kind of battle? I think a lot of us battle with something feeling like a loss of freedom. So, oh my gosh, if I start to own a business, when freedom, we value it so highly. How did you manage that with also your love of what you know you're here to do?
Yeah, so it took a lot of years to come around. Like I never really felt that I wanted to own something that kind of kept me in Chicago because once I got back, it was all about studying yoga. So I lived in the Ukraine for 4 months. I lived in New York for a year, like just to study with teachers. So I was all over the place. I went to the Ayurvedic Institute for 2 years in New Albuquerque, New Mexico. So I was gone. Chicago, I always kept getting drawn back to, and I wasn't even fearful of owning a place. It just wasn't in my thoughts. Like I was
Mm.
like, I'm good. And then I was in Albuquerque, and then a good friend of mine who I lived with in Ukraine and studied with, Andre Lapa, for a while, Jim Bennett. I remember it was like such a core memory. It's so weird how core memories work. But I believe there was a landline at the time, and this wasn't even that long ago. This was like maybe 16 years ago. But I think that the apartment had a landline, I think. And I remember standing next to the kitchen in the living room, and he's like, "Okay, so at school, how's things going?" Now, Jim never calls me,
Yeah.
so I knew something was up. And I'm like, "Yeah, school's wrapping up, and I don't know really what I'm going to do next." And he's like, "Well, are you going to come back to Chicago?" And I said, "Yeah." I think so. I said, "I feel like it feels like home to me. And I don't want to stay here." And he's like, "Good, because we're opening up a yoga studio." And that was it. Like, and then I said, okay. It was that quick. Like, I didn't have to think about it. Like, I didn't be like,
Okay.
let me think about it. Let me get back to you, Jim. Like, it was just that quick. Like, I just knew that that's what was supposed to happen because I really was. I just planned on probably going back to Chicago, picking up my privates again, getting back into like the fitness facilities. Because that was my life. That's all I did for, I don't even know how long, 10 years or something. That's just what I expected to do, but that was not what was going to happen. So I think it was just time. I think we both shared common principles in terms of like the importance of keeping the tradition of hatha yoga and tantric yoga and applying Ayurvedic knowledge into what we teach and into the studio. And at that time, a lot of the yoga studios were very focused on the physical practice and like very fast vinyasa and hot yoga and stuff was really popular. And there's nothing wrong with that. Everything has its place, but that just wasn't what we did. And we felt like the oddballs because we were incorporating breath work and meditation into our regular classes. And people were just like, what the fuck is this? But then they experienced it and they actually liked it.
Yeah.
And we just felt like there was that missing component to I just feel like you get people prepared, you get them unwound, you get their bodies, their physical bodies, you get their presence in their body, and then you just send them home. Like I just felt like you were really doing a disservice to your students. And they're like, no, 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 no. There's more. But wait, I felt like an infomercial, but wait, there's more. Like you can do breath work and like really change your shit, like you can do meditation and really like do the work.
Well, there's a level of integration. I mean, that's why I loved, I knew you and Jim, and I was going to some other studios too that were closer by in the city. But like you said, what you were offering was just different. And there's an integration that people are now talking about more. Okay, you can mentally do things, but also yoga's already with the body. But when you add in these other pieces with the integration and how that exponentializes through your whole life is so different. So when you add in those pieces, it's just infomercial, a different ballgame.
Yeah. And so that was the basis of like, okay, like this is why we wanted to open up our own space. So yeah, I moved back and it took me a year to pull a business plan out of my ass because I'd never done that before. So like I like just basically bought like 5 books on, even business plan for dummies. Like I even had that. I actually learned quite a bit from business plan for dummies. So it took about a year to find some real estate and get the business plan together and find people that wanted to get involved. And we were very fortunate how that all unfolded. Again, it was based in people that believed in us and good friendships that really encouraged us to do this. And yeah, again, something that it was almost like it wasn't a choice. We felt so impassioned, if that's a word, by the idea of having a yoga studio place to build this particular community. Um, and so yeah, and of course then that ups and downs. We're like the nomadic yoga studio for whatever reason. I mean, this is our fourth location that we have for some reason, like again, impermanence.
Impermanence.
Just
Yeah.
yeah,
We're done
just
with
in
it.
like, hey, you're growing out of this space. Okay, we have to move this space. Hey, this space is like not working anymore. Oh, so move this space. Oh, guess what? The city's gonna shut down for fucking months, and now you can't afford this place. And it's just like Jesus. Like, and I refuse to say. So every time we'd move, I was like, Jim, because it's such a pain in the ass. We'd have to build out every space. All that shit would land on me. And I was like, I'm done. Like, we're not moving again. I'm dying here. Like, I'm dying in this place. And it jinxed us every single time. So this last time, I go, Jim, maybe we'll move in a month. I don't know. Let's see. Let's see what I'm not saying it. I'm not jinxing it. I'm giving up. Like wherever we're supposed to be,
I've surrendered. Like,
we're supposed to be. Like, I'm done playing that game with the heavens. So
well, I
yeah.
want to make sure, in the show notes, I'm going to link to how, because if you're not in Chicago or can't get there, you guys have online classes and like on demand, all sorts of amazing stuff. But if you're in Chicago and can visit, your studio is now in which building is it?
The Chicago Board of Trade building. So it's a
Yeah.
really iconic. We're so happy to do it. I always feel like Bruce Wayne when I walk in there, like so important. It's beautiful. It's very Art Deco. It was built in the 30s. That's where the trading floor used to be. I think there's another smaller trading floor. That's all changed because it's all electronic now. But gorgeous building, heart of the loop, easy to get to. We're surrounded by all kinds of public transportation, and we love being in the building. It's a great space. It's bigger than our other space. And over the course of the last year and a half, we've really made it our own. So kind of put our stamp on it. And so it has shaped up in the last year and a half. And it's a longer, more kind of interesting story how that yoga studio ended up being in the Chicago Board of Trade building. A buddy of ours started it years ago, probably 18 or maybe even 20 years ago. I can't remember. But so yeah, so we're there, and we have all of our regularly scheduled classes are live virtually, so you can chime in. We get people from Israel, London, people from Turkey practice with us. So it's
Wow.
really cool to have people from all over the world being able to take classes with us, and then from all over the United States and Canada. It's pretty cool. And then we have an on-demand site which we started during COVID because we we're like, okay, this is not going anywhere, and more people are going to just lean toward online classes, and we still wanted to offer them, give them something online that incorporated still what we offered, breathwork and concentration and meditation techniques. And it also gave us an opportunity to create tutorials for people, like, okay, this is a breathing technique that you might not be familiar with. This is how you do it. Maybe you run into it in class and they don't explain it well, so because there's only so much time in a class. So we do tutorials, and we're always adding to that. So I think we have like at this point like almost 300 different classes or tutorials, everything from 20-minute classes to 90-minute classes, different physical exertion levels, gentle, vigorous. So it's a great site. We're really happy. And this year we're going to start doing pay-per-view trainings. So I'm going to in the next month have an intro to yoga course on there that you can basically like just purchase the course, and then that way people will have an opportunity to start yoga with us.
Yeah.
So that will be available hopefully by the end of this month or in March, shooting for spring of 2024 to have that up. So hopefully by March.
Oh, that's such a cool resource. So I want to share that because it's such a difference. Like you said, if, I've heard people go, well, I don't really like yoga. Well, there's so many kinds you can try, so many different teachers. And to also have someone, like you said, if it's in a short tutorial or an intro class, really show you all the postures, how to hold your body. So it is this beauty of ease and effort and you're not hurting yourself, it makes all the difference. Then it's really, I've always looked at it, it's like this lifetime practice that makes me able to do all the other things I like to do in the world too, and have a connection with my body and my breath and my world in just a different way.
Yeah.
I'm so lucky to talk with you.
Yeah. Thanks for
Share,
inviting me.
like,
It's
yeah. Okay. So, last thing, because I like to ask everybody, I have on 2 short questions. First one, this is going to be a fun one to ask you. Where is the one place in the world you want to go that you haven't been, or your favorite place? You can go in either direction that you have been.
my favorite place is easy. That is Istanbul. If you believe in past lives or not, doesn't matter to me because I know I've had past lives there. That place has pieces of my heart. I don't know why, but I've been there several times now, and I can keep going back over and over and over again. So Istanbul, and I keep wanting to explore more of Turkey, but I just keep getting drawn to that city for so many reasons. But I would love to do like maybe a retreat somewhere
Oh,
on the coast or
yeah.
something there. Yeah. So that might be in the works. And yeah, in a place that I haven't been that I'm drawn to, I feel really fortunate enough in the past, if I've been drawn somewhere, I just make it happen. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just like, oh, okay, I'm gonna
Yeah. I've
figure
done
it
that.
out. So that's been I've been really lucky for that. But the places that I haven't explored much that I would really like to go to is Prague is a place, Budapest is another place, Vienna. If I could do those three in like 2 week to a month long trip, I think I'd really dig that. Yeah. There's just something,
I like that. Okay. Yeah.
yeah,
Something
it's
in
like,
you there.
yeah, something's drawing to me to those three places. And for some reason I lump them together. I don't know why, but I imagine myself experiencing those places. So that's an area of the world that I would go to next.
Okay. And then last one, do you have a book or a movie that either has been really influential for you or that you'd recommend to other people as something that you just found really changed the way you see the world?
Yeah, I hope that I get the name of this book right. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now because I want to make sure. So I was going through a period of my life. I'm going to keep talking, but I'm going to look for these books because I really want to get the names of these books.
Okay. I like
Um, yeah, so I was going through a very, I guess, say dark period in my life where a lot of shit hit the fan for me, and I became very overwhelmed. I started going back to my old behavior of using substances and sex ultimately to curb my feelings of being overwhelmed and being afraid. I think more things were also coming up for me with the fear of what's next. And so I ended up basically hitting rock bottom. And my behavior towards people that I loved was regrettable. I've worked through a lot of that and forgiving myself because I really was doing the best I fucking could at that time. I was in a really just a bad place, just really depressed and not really acknowledging that I was depressed. And it was weird because I had all these tools, but I felt like they were just keeping my head above water. And so I ended up getting into AA, stopped drinking, stopped having sex, stopped doing any kind of drugs, and just basically decided I couldn't do this by myself. Like I can't. I needed help and I couldn't do this by myself. And so two books came into my life and I'd never heard of them before or anything like that. But at that time in my life, they really helped me put things in perspective and gave me some language that helped me to like cultivate a lot of healing and perspective for me. And they're both by David R. Hawkins. And I read them back to back. Like I just read both of these books, like one right after the next. Once I read one of them, I was like, I need to get this other guy's book. And it was Power versus Force. And the other book is Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. So power versus force focused on, and the subtitle is the hidden determinants of human behavior.
Wow.
And I think when you're dealing with alcoholism, which is in my bloodline as a contract that I've just took on as a soul, there's a lot of familial healing that's going on for me, through me, with that sort of, you have to figure out why you're doing these things. You have to figure out why. In my opinion, I know some other people might have different perspectives on alcoholism, but I think people experience it differently. But for me, I really need to figure out why I was using these substances. And this book, I felt like, really helped with understanding this human behavior. And then the next book that I read was this Letting Go, The Pathway of Surrender. And I just feel like those two books were very powerful. So I think if anybody is suffering from substance abuse, are coming out of it, I think they're really good books for people that might be in AA or NA. I think just understanding ourselves, which I think yoga can help us do, but sometimes there's not enough. Sometimes yoga is more experiential than there's language around it. Sometimes I needed anyway, like more language to understand who I am and why my behavior is the way that it is. So those two books would be something I'd recommend for anybody, but particularly for people that might be dealing with some sort of substance abuse or addiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you for that. That recommendation for you, for the conversation, for being a phenomenal friend and a really just magnificent being on the planet that I'm really lucky to know and to share with everybody listening to.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, and I love talking to you, of course. And yeah, it's been great. So yeah, I'm excited. And let people know that I'm approachable. I'm available. Email me, contact me. I like questions, and I like to be of service to people. So if I can be of help of any way, to anybody that's hearing this, I'll do what I can.
Well, we'll link to your Instagram and email and it's Tejas Yoga
Chicago.com.
Chicago.com. And
Yep.
then your email is on there.
Yep. Great.
Yeah, great. Thank
All
you.
right.
Mwah.
Yeah, love you.
Bye, everybody. Bye. I hope you got something out of that episode. If you like this podcast, please share it with someone you know who would find it useful or interesting, and subscribe so that you can listen to past and upcoming shows.